Welcome to the Perceptions Today podcast, where we discuss consciousness in all forms. January 2022, episode 10, Paranormal Blip, joins us for a Reincarnation Roundtable, part 3 of 4. Paranormal Blip is a podcast discussing all areas of the paranormal.
My mum, who was always quite curious and alert to everything, she noticed that there was something about the way that he was looking at the pillowcase that interested her. The pillowcase was a floral pillowcase. It had flowers on it.
This is an instance of the conversation coming up in the roundtable discussion. Participants knew it was being recorded.
I'm interested to find out whether there's also visual or auditory kind of sensations that went along with those memories that you picked up. Regardless.
Yeah, there is. I mean, it's different for everybody. Some people are better at seeing visual stuff. For me, it was really hard to retrieve anything like that, but for me, it was just mainly the emotional aspect of it. What that person lived through, and that's what I think is really important, though. But I think people could definitely hear things, see things. It's really interesting.
Because obviously it's a very complex thing to actually try and explain to other people who are not actually there at the same time. Krista?
Hi, I've had to pop in and out of the conversation, so apologize if you've already talked about this, but my question is, if we're all here right now, aren't we all old souls? I mean, is there a finite amount of souls that are here? I've met people that were immature and, uninquisitive and seemed very young. And people say it's a young soul. And then you meet people that just seem older, wiser, or more just new, like dense with soul, for lack of a better word. I guess my question is, how would you define someone to be a young soul? Is a young soul being spawned out of some sort of center? Because if we're all here now, we've all come from some other place, so we're all returning. Is it coming from just a lower life form? Are we reincarnating from a rock, and then as the first carnation of being human, because you're coming from a rock, is that considered a young soul? I guess I'm trying to wrap my own mind around reincarnation as a cycle, and I know that in religious traditions that use reincarnation as part of their understanding of things, you want to just keep revolving until you kind of revolve out. But where is it coming from? And, if you're not talking about it from a specific religious, theology, how would you define, and this is to Paranormal Blip, how would you define what a young soul is versus an old soul? And thanks.
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. Absolutely brilliant question, Krista. And I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, it's really interesting, this whole area. I think that's a really key question. Like, where do we begin? And this idea of young souls, and of course you see it, you see it in people, and your description of those people is accurate. And we also see it in, I think, certainly I know children where you think, there's something going on with them. I wouldn't put it as kind of blatantly as the people in my folks' book saying, you're foxy, you've been here before. I mean, obviously, I don't have that sense or that kind of sensibility about me to kind of detect that. Having said that, you can, there is a difference. There's a kind of grading in terms of how you kind of sense the youthfulness or the kind of the age of a soul. Where we come from and the kind of beginnings of this is fascinating. I mean, and I don't know, and it'd be really interesting to hear from people that do know the research and know this area. I do know that in NDEs and in this book, Journey of Souls, and certainly in, my folks hinted it in some of the cases in their book. This idea of when you're in the other world, in the kind of soul world or whatever you want to call it, there is this teaching happening, that you're learning and you're kind of discussing and you're kind of like progressing and you're being challenged and you're learning, and you get to the point where, I'm not sure, I think this might be from Journey of Souls, you get to the point where you kind of go up different levels, where you become kind of carnated enough times where you kind of get your act together and you start getting to know things and you become the teacher. You're not just the student, you're the teacher, and then you're the kind of whatever, like the facilitator of the teachers or whatever. And then you get to the point where you start to create matter. I don't know, there's like this incredible bit in Journey of Souls where one of the testimonies of the people, which was like, so that book is essentially people that were under hypnotic regression, is that what it's called? So they're kind of like remembering past lives. And the thing that the writer, whose name I've forgotten, embarrassingly enough, well, I could just Google it actually. Well, but can I Google and talk at the same time? But anyway, whoever wrote Journey of Souls, his kind of key aspect in, like, in that book, his key kind of area of interest was the gap between lives, like the place beyond, if you like, or the kind of the realm where the souls go between lives, And in that book, he talks about
Michael Newton,
of course, thank you, Paul. So in that book, he talks about how this testimony from this person that says they were making stones. They were making stones. I can't quite remember the specifics of it, but this idea that they're creating stones. So they've kind of like got to the stage where, like, the levels, they've climbed up the levels where they can, kind of create stuff. So, but of course, that's the opposite of what you're asking, Krista. That's kind of where we go, if you like, and the kind of, that's going forwards, where we come from, and where the soul, like, how do you create a soul? How do you birth a soul? It's a fascinating question. I'm not sure. I mean, I know I can see Fractals put their hands up, but anyone jump in if you know anything about this?
Oh, come on. I had my hand up for a while. I just wanted to get in, then I get Fractal in.
Okay, go, Paul.
Okay, so I've read a wide variety of topics. So it's my kind of opinion after assessing bits. And I will be wrong because obviously in 2021, I've only got so much information. But you've obviously got a whole set of a universe, which again is a paradox because we don't know where it came from in the first place and matter, etc. But if you've got so much intelligence and consciousness dropping in and out, like, as I've been saying to people recently, a drop to an ocean, they can be coming back in other locations. It doesn't always have to be in one permanent globe, Earth, planet, etc. It could be all over the place. And again, we also know that time doesn't really exist in a linear format for everything. So everything could be happening all at the same time. And you're just not you personally, but just we can't figure it out because we just haven't got enough facts to go with it. And I think Fractal is going to probably add to this when I bring Fractal in. Fractal, come in. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can. Yep. Yes.
Hello,
Sorry.
good evening.
I'll put myself on mute then.
I just wanted to add to that too, that, maybe, time truly isn't linear.
Hang on one second, Fractal. Your audio went a bit low. Do you want to just tell me if you're on a headset? Or where do you go, Fractal?
Can you hear me? I'm on AirPods.
There you are.
Journey of Souls.
That's okay. That's clear. Okay, continue, please, or repeat as well.
I wanted to add to that maybe from our perspective, time seems linear, but it's really not. And maybe a soul, like in this time, it could be their first life, but, they may reincarnate in what we would perceive as the past. There's a really good YouTube video about this. It's called The Egg. If you just go on YouTube and you type The Egg, a short story, it does a much better job at explaining this concept than I could. That's all I have to say.
That's good. We will do that. I'm just putting into a link from YouTube, the Journey of Souls audiobook link, so that if people want to see that. And back to yourself, Paranormal Blip, while I'm continuing doing that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, picking up on this time thread. So this other realm, the folks in Journey of Souls talk about choosing. There's this incredible story of somebody who decides, like, it's their time now to choose their new life, yeah, and they have a I kind of say that they've got to the stage now where they can kind of negotiate with their guide a little bit, yeah, and they say, yeah, I kind of want to be an artist in like the 80s, and I want to live in New York. I mean, how cool is it? Like, if this happens, this would be incredible. Imagine that. Although I don't know why.
You're literally picking your game, aren't you, really?
Exactly,
You're picking the game you want to play with all the permutations.
Maybe I don't have much control over it, but I'm not sure why my soul said, yeah, I want to be born with a incredibly difficult to manage heart condition. But anyway, this dude says, you know, I want to be an artist in the 80s and I want to live in New York. And he had this, as he describes it, a television screen, kind of like that he could watch the life through. So it's almost as if, and this connects to Anthony Peake's work, yeah, in a big way. It's almost as if the life was something that was in some of the kind of human, the artist. Hold on, I'm going to cough.
Meanwhile, I'll take this opportunity to plug some people while they're in here. We've recently done a podcast under the title of Perceptions Today, and again, it's in the bio of myself in the link, and you can follow through on Spotify, also Anchor and other places, and YouTube. And as I've said before, there's some really good people in here. Have a look at Gabe Miranda. He's got some very good work on dreams and going through his experiences. You've also got Vooght, who is, as I said, a good author and researcher. Ricardo always has really good information to put on the table, whether it be from an archaeological point of view, civilizations along those lines. Krista is very good at lucid dreaming. And Estevelle just comes in and really likes to know knowledge. He's also a very good cook. I've just seen some of his tweets from this evening. He's been having a very good meal himself. Fract was turned up a few times. Azure has always got good information and coming to the table. And also, who else have I seen that I can recommend? Again, Renegade and Tamara Dick. Should always look up her. Can you talk at the moment, Tamara?
Is this working now?
It's working now. We can hear you. Good evening.
Hi.
Welcome to the table.
Hi. I was running extremely late today. Barely got in.
Okay. Could you take it from the top, Pete, from minute 1, please?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about reincarnation tonight. Boom, boom. So, hello, Tamara. How are you? You okay? Yeah, good. Okay, cool. So what was I saying? Oh, yeah. So this TV screen, yeah? And it's almost as if the life had basically happened, okay? Or the life was kind of happening separate to the decision that the soul was going to make. So they were kind of like umming and ahhing. Am I going to be this guy? Am I going to be this guy? I quite like the idea of this guy, yeah? And so, okay, I'm going to be this guy. And then obviously, like when the soul enters the person, it's like begins at birth, you know. So so this time question is absolutely fascinating. I mean, really, you know, there's something there. There's something really interesting there. And I wish I knew, like, you know, it'd be really lovely to be in the position of, say, for instance, you know, Tucker or Stevenson, and kind of like have a overview of, you know, thousands of cases. Unfortunately, I don't have that. But Yeah, it's really interesting. So if anyone has anything to add to this kind of question of time or any aspect of this, so we've talked about reincarnation, we've talked about souls, this kind of idea of soul groups, early memories that people are having, and then this issue of time as well.
We've been very lucky that Fractal has actually been able to grab the YouTube link, and it's now placed in the shared group area, and also has included yourself and myself in the actual tweet. So thank you very much for that, Fractal, which is good of you. The way that you've also got it, there's people that will have, as you say, trauma of events where, for example, you've got, I think it was several cases in India where there was gunshot wounds, again, not like, probably very similar to like the Turkish one, but it happened to a young child, and they reincarnated probably about, again, just under the 4-year mark in a village. Again, there was no real telephone communication between this, about 6 to 7 miles away. And when this kid was talking about his family and all his sisters and everything else, a group went over as researchers, found the village, after doing, obviously, a while of talking to them, and I'm trimming this right down, got them all out into the middle of a square, for example, and all the family mixed up amongst the other people of that village so that they couldn't just be standing in a clump. Then they brought the young child who had all this information about them, and he actually picked them out of the crowd. And that was quite amazing. Oh, by the way, now I've just turned my eye, 2 hands have gone up. I don't know whether Krista got up first or Esteville, but I shall ask to see who. Right, Esteville, do you know if you put your hand up first or not?
No, Krista can go first.
That's very kind of you to do so.
I think we put them up about the same time, but thanks. I was just going to add quickly that I have a memory that I've had as long as I can remember anything that isn't reconcilable with my experience. And as a really young child, I had this vision of looking down at my body and looking out on the scene in front of me. And, I grew up in the States, in the South. I grew up in the coast. And this memory was of a Mediterranean scene, very rocky, very arid. And I was an old woman. And it was just something that I hadn't associated it with a story that I was told. It was just this visual of looking down at my bare feet and then looking out into the vista in front of me. And so I thought, if there is reincarnation, maybe that's just a memory that's just stayed. And so when I was in my early 20s, I traveled to Greece with my sister to see if it kind of triggered any sort of knowing or memory. And while it was an amazing trip, because Greece, is just gorgeous and really yummy food and very friendly people and just saturated with such history, I didn't have that feeling of I've been here before, but my sister did. I had to just tear her away from there. She felt like she was home, and so I didn't understand that feeling until about 13 years later when I went to Ireland for the first time. I had this feeling, this bodily knowing that I was home. And I wonder if there's just some sort of somatic knowledge that our souls, when we return to the place that we had been to before in a previous life, to me, it felt like my heart was growing roots. I just wanted to stay because I just knew it so emotionally. And even though the memory that I had that may have been a past life, when I visited that land, it didn't kind of trigger, but I felt like I was the catalyst to bring my sister back to her previous lives there, possibly. But I immediately knew that I had at some point had a life in Ireland, because it was like a religious experience, feeling that feeling. And I don't know how to reconcile that either. I've heard other people say that about other places that they've traveled, and I've traveled to many beautiful places and have loved them, but I've never been able to replicate that feeling that I had when I was in Ireland, and I'm curious if other people have had similar experiences when they've traveled outside of where they live.
Yeah, I certainly
Yeah.
have. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying the same thing. Like when I've been to certain places in Europe, I've got a vibe there, like I've been there before, and it was very much like home and so on and so forth. So I could definitely relate to you a lot in that sense.
Yes, similarly.
That is amazing.
Yeah, similarly. Greece is beautiful. First of all, Greece is the word. Greece is beautiful, and I love Greece. But in Ireland, it's interesting. My mum was born in Scotland, but her folks were her mother was Irish, and her kind of extended family are from Ireland. And I feel Scottish, and I love Scotland, and I am half Scottish, but I've never lived there. But I've been to Ireland quite a few times, and I feel like Ireland is my home in exactly the same way, Krista, that you talk about.
This would be quite spooky if you find out that Krista happens to be a relative by synchronicity. This will be quite bizarre.
My heritage is from Wales, Scotland, England, Ireland, northern Brittany, a little bit of Eastern Europe, but for the most part, it is from those islands. And I had been to the UK.
This would be hilarious.
I'd been to the UK before.
Yeah.
Did not. I mean, I loved London. It had a great time. I didn't have that connection like I did when I was in Ireland. I'm sorry?
Is your surname Mayo?
No, my surname's Hamilton.
Oh, sorry. It's just that it says Krista De Mayo.
Yeah, that's my fake name.
You should never ask women for their real names. Have you not learnt this yet,
I'm
Pete?
going to ask her age next. So.
Yeah, and also photograph and everything else. Don't do it. Don't get us into trouble already.
There is a connection to Ireland and Mayo because they really love mayonnaise in Ireland. So.
Well, there's a county Mayo. There's a county Mayo for sure. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's Mayo as well.
And don't get the Dutch onto good old mayonnaise on chips as well. So after, obviously, Krista, there's obviously Estevel, then Tamara, because their hands were up.
Oh, me now? Yeah.
Estevel.
I don't know if anyone has an answer to this. I mean, I already said this. Within Buddhism, they try to achieve nirvana. So then that's the end of reincarnation. I don't know what happens then to the soul, but I know in Judaism they believe in reincarnation until the end of time, and partners finding their soulmate. Christianity doesn't have that. I'm not religious, so I'm just wondering what. So no one has had an answer to Krista's question about where did the souls come from, because there are more and more people. So, they need new souls. They need more souls. And it's just, and what's the purpose? Why would you keep coming back? And, assuming this is true, I just, anyway, I have.
Well, Estevel, if you want, you could have the fact, why do you keep playing video games and keep playing the same one when you can do different variations? It's that kind of concept which has been played many times. Plus, also, when you're talking about number of souls, there's such a big reality stroke dimensional whatever. You could have different fractions falling off all over the place and reappearing elsewhere. And it could all be fractal at the end, that your personality was one at one stage, which is consciousness, and it just fractally comes apart but keeps on rejoining itself. But once it rejoins itself, it's only got experience. It's only got memories of experience. You can't actually do the experience in the physical.
Do you think that the soul stays whole, and then just moves because all our molecules were already here on Earth. So, so I suppose opinion, life forms that, we are comprised of mostly water and carbon and stuff that may have been part of millions of years a dinosaur, and that is now in your body. And but how does that work with the soul? Does that, maybe that's just blended into a whole, like you put something in a mixer and then you have a bunch of, you put in 10 souls and then you have 10 different souls comprised of, they're just made up of other souls.
Okay, so in my opinion, and again, I'm quite happy to be proven wrong at some stage. It's not a perfect idea, but I feel because we're all energy and you're connected to everything, it's where your consciousness goes. You can actually drop off the experience. You're coming here and doing experience, but because we don't know how consciousness moves and everything's within inside consciousness, that once you just drift off, you might end up being, fractionally taken back into the whole, but also become another fractal part and come back as something different. You won't remember yourself as this personality. You'll probably have some kind of information, but because obviously consciousness is one and it's got all the information in it all the time, it's going to be a strange thing that it'd be difficult not to have some kind of information within yourself that's different. To be a blank would be very hard, being part of consciousness, as he rambles again.
Yeah, no, I think that's
but tomorrow's got the answer.
Sorry, just to say, I think that's really perceptive perceptions. I think you're onto something there, and also it reminds me of this thing, which is another Peake and link to Anthony Peake's work. That somewhere along the line, I've got this memory of reading about this idea that it's not your entire soul, if you like, or maybe we should, swap that word out for consciousness sometimes. It's not your entire kind of non-material being that is kind of manifest on Earth or kind of like, here in the body, but there is some remnants of it that is in the other place, yeah? So, which connects to Anthony Peake's idea of I can't remember what they're called, but the
Daemon Eidolon.
Exactly, the Daemon and the
Eidolon,
which sounds like a ITV detective series. But yeah, exactly, yeah. So that idea that there is a part of you that is overseeing or certainly kind of connected to like this kind of bigger other world, and is there not every part of you comes here. So anyway, sorry, go on, Tamara.
I was just going to quickly put in, while Renegade has put something in, which will tie into Estevel, then we get to Tamara quickly. Sorry about this, Tamara. So Renegade says that in Buddhism, there is one universal soul. The universal soul is representing itself in 6 realms. One of them is in the human. So simply said, all the souls in these realms, like our own egos, when reaching nirvana, you step out of all realms and become one again. So it's very similar to what we've just been discussing. Thank you, Renegade, for that piece of information. And Tamara, sorry for the wait.
Oh, is it my turn? I was responding to...
Don't be sarky.
I was responding to what Krista was saying about traveling somewhere and feeling like you belong there. You've been there before. I experienced that when I went out west, and I've always naturally felt like that was my home. And I noticed my circadian rhythm is also, it seems to be stuck in kind of West Coast time. I don't know if anyone else has experienced the time zone coincidence as well, but I thought that was kind of interesting.
Can you give an example of that, or can you just go into that a little bit more, please, Tamara?
Well, I've always had insomnia, even as a child, but my normal, there's a 3-hour difference. It's 3 hours earlier in California from Pennsylvania in the USA. So when I traveled there, I was up, usually in Pennsylvania, I was up until maybe 3 a.m. or 1 a.m. And that's like normal time for the West Coast. That would be, around 11 o'clock or midnight. So that when I moved to California, I was there for 15 years, and I kind of felt it was natural to be in that time zone. Then when I moved back to Pennsylvania, my circadian rhythm never readjusted to the East Coast time zone. So that's something I noticed over the years, and I was wondering about. You know, it always feels like you're the only one experiencing something like that, so you never really talk about it.
Yeah. That's really interesting. When I've spent time in Australia, which is obviously not, you know, it's got a totally different time zone to the UK. I spent a bit of time over there, and you know, you're aware. I mean, I wouldn't kind of put it exactly the same way as you, but you're definitely aware of the UK time. You know, UK everything. You know, but also UK time. You're like, there's a kind of track of you know, part of your mind is always on where you're at or where you would be if you were, you know, where you're from, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's really interesting. Yeah, thank you for saying that. It's like what I love about that is the, you know, this feeling, this sense that maybe you've never articulated that, but these spaces open up in these conversations. It's called spaces, but I mean, this is really, you know, this is the genius of this group, you know, well, maybe not genius, but certainly above 100, where, you know, these spaces are opened up for us to kind of try to put words to these things, which might just be, you know, feelings, you know. Thank you for saying that, Tamara.
Oh, well, space is the final frontier.
Exactly, yeah. I couldn't put it better myself.
Definitely.
There was another observation I had that of course, listening to this topic triggered my memory. I had seen a spiritual healer back in my early 20s trying to get like answers to my childhood trauma. And that was the first time that the idea of past lives and past memories was introduced to me. And that I basically was raised with, you know, strict Christian beliefs that countered that, and it wasn't allowed to be discussed or questioned. But with the belief system I grew up in, we were taught that the soul and the body are one and the same. They aren't separate. So it makes it confusing to try and think of things in terms of where does the soul come from? Where does it go? It almost seemed like it was considered property of the Creator, and mankind wasn't meant to ask these questions. So now that I can ask these questions, I'm still probing the subject, but it's still kind of a foreign concept to me.
Well, you're definitely in the right place, because we're all trying to find out the right answers. And the more of us grow together, as you've probably seen, we're plugging again. We're going from a drop to an ocean. And if you listen to the latest episode on the podcast that we've just created, you can hear other people talk about the same thing, and we're all moving forwards. And I think when you talk to Anthony Peake on the 15th of December, because obviously we've got the 2 sessions coming up, he's got some good views on it, and people that are coming in and we'll be talking about it. And it's just fascinating. We're all in the right place at the right time. Estevel?
No, I don't know if it's really a question, but I was just thinking, because the source and then ultimately going back to the source, like if, you know, every night I watch the planets, because you can, with a bare eye, you can see when the sun sets, you can see Venus and you can see Saturn and Jupiter with a naked eye. But of course, actually you're just watching photons bounce off these planets, which come from the sun. So indirectly it's sunlight, even though we don't refer to it as sunlight, because, you know, that's like Venus or Jupiter, or etc., or the moon. And at the center of our galaxy, there's this black hole that absorbs everything. So ultimately,
Well, technically, black holes don't absorb everything. We are actually getting heat and also data out of them. But yeah.
So then, well, not in our lifetime, but eventually, the sun, probably the sun will already gobble up the Earth before that when it goes supernova. But ultimately, at the center, everything is swallowed up by this black hole. So that's like returning to a source as well. And then, if in Hinduism, they always talk about Kali, like the cycle of destruction. They talk about these cycles too. I'm not an expert on Hinduism, but
definitely, your colleague Renegade has also supplied some more information for you about Nirvana, if you would like.
Yeah, sure.
So Renegade says it's a bit complicated to explain simply, but because we can enter several realms with our thinking. For example, if we are greedy, we're in the realm of the hungry ghost, while being human in meditation. So when we are being present or being in the stage before thinking starts, we are connected with the one universal soul. Again, we have this problem that language is not the best thing to describe everything. We just can't get it right. We can only just give speculation on things until we find something else. But it's the way to go on that, I feel. And thank you, Renegade, for supplying us.
Yeah, I do wonder, Esteval. Thank you for that. That's brilliant. Kind of mind blowing, really. But I do wonder if there's a parallel, a kind of chronological parallel between the world that we're, living in, and the history that we can evidence and look back upon, and then this other place and the history of that other place. And and there's something about this idea, this theory of what's his name, Pierre de Chardin. I always butcher that guy's name, but the idea of point omega, that everything is drawing towards a kind of super consciousness, if you like, which isn't his phrase but my phrase, but essentially a kind of like a connection between everything. Everything becomes connected, and there's no need for materialist or material properties at all. Do you know that guy? I'm butchering his name, Perceptions, but do you know who I'm talking about?
We're talking about the French Jesuit.
I am talking about the French Jesuit, yeah. And this idea of
So that's Pierre Teilhard de la Chardin,
beautifully put.
1881 to 1955. He argued that the point resembles the Christian logos, namely Christ, who draws all things into himself, who, in the words of the Nicene Creed, is God from God, light from light, the true God from true God, and through him all things were made. In the book of Revelations, Christ describes him thrice as the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. The idea of the Omega point is developed in later writings, such as those of John David Garcia in 1971, and, I'm going to butcher her name now, ready? Paolo Solaria in 1981, Frank Tipler in 1994, and David Deutsch in 1997. So that's good old Wikipedia, everybody. But the fascinating thing that gets me and a few other people is that we're all talking about light, and it's in all the religious books and texts. And obviously we think about 0 point fields and light coming up from that. It just gets crazy at that point where the information is. Where do you really come from? But I still would like to find out why I think everything is a paradox, because of my standard thoughts of the world of the origin point. Because if everything is light, just how much is contained within it? Because how many consciousness can you get into a photon? It'd be quite interesting to see. I don't think you need mass for consciousness. Anybody else about mass for consciousness?
I've got just something to say. A friend of mine at work, she has this tendency to Google all of the things that I think everyone should know about, but because she's in her 20s, she doesn't know who Cab Calloway is, for instance. I talk about Cab Calloway, and she doesn't know who the hell I'm talking about.
That's terrible.
I know.
Quick,
These
get
young
onto the Blues
people,
Brothers. Get onto the Blues Brothers.
She's got this incredible ability to Google information, real-time Googling, and you are up there with her, Paul. That is really impressive that you're so fast at the old, jumping on Wikipedia. So thank you for that. And he's really interesting.
That's okay.
I speak about him in I can't remember which episode now, but I talk about this idea of Point Omega.
Quick, plug the podcast and tell them to go and search.
Yeah, I can see there's a couple of listeners here that don't appear every week. So thank you for listening, first of all. And
that sounded like you were going to dock them points.
No, it's just because we've got our regulars, haven't we? And they all know about us, about you, and about me.
But you should plug your podcast at that point where you actually do talk about the information.
I will plug my podcast. It's called Paranormal Blip. Take a listen. 11 episodes so far, each episode looking at a different aspect of the paranormal phenomena. Quite a kind of broad range of different things, from remote viewing to UAPs to, what else? The shadow biosphere, a whole bunch of different things. Thank you very much. Fractal, I don't know if Fractal can speak at the moment, but Fractal, I want to know about fractals. So I don't want to, obviously put your hand up if you want to take this into any other area to everybody listening. But I'm really fascinated by fractals, and I don't know anything about them, really,
Did you do Mandelbrot's?
What?
Did you do Mandelbrot investigation? It's the pattern.
No, I don't.
The Mandelbrot just keeps going on into itself.
No, tell me more, please, Paul.
Well, I'll go let somebody else do it. I'll go and grab a piece of information and throw it into the share section. Evening, Fuji. It's nice to see you here. Nice to see you, Chris. I haven't seen you for a while. Azure, you're very quiet this evening. And also, maybe if I gave you the opportunity to talk, it might be good. If you want to talk, of course, Azure, unless you're working.
I've got something to say on fractal.
Oh, you can say quite happily.
As above, so below. My uncle, who was the black sheep of the family, as a kid, he used to say, the biggest big is the smallest small. And no one ever understood what he was saying. And I repeated, as above, so below, trying to teach my mother the esoterics and about fractals. And she's like, oh, my God, your uncle used to say that to me when we were kids. But he'd say the biggest big is the smallest small. I go, well, he's a genius. Everyone treats him like the black sheep of the family. In other words, everything, a fractal is a repetition of itself on a smaller or larger scale. And we see it throughout nature. And imagine, if you will, sometimes I take it and I play games with it. Imagine if our planets in our solar system were different chakras of a human body. We could be the microcosm of a larger entity. And just as we look further and further into the smallest microcosmic thing that we can investigate, the patterns repeat from a large to a small scale. As far as light, it's amazing how much information one photon can hold, or think that we believe it can hold. And it must work on a fractal system as well. The interesting thing about photons is when we get into DNA, how DNA reacts to photons and how DNA absorbs light.
And also produces light as well.
Correct. And
a crystal.
The piezo crystals in our pineal gland, you mean?
The DNA is also a crystal.
That I don't know. I'm still investigating that. Tell me more about
No,
that.
it is. From other biologists that I've been reading about that produce biophotons, which is light emitting from those structures, DNA actually does produce it. So they're thinking that if you read books along the lines of James Narby, anything to do with shamanism, where they start to say they go into themselves and light and colors become more intense and fantastic, it's more likely that consciousness is going down through into the DNA or even through the brain, and we're going into possibly the 0 point field and being taken down that way instead of expanding outwards and absorbing into something else, which is a fascinating line to actually read into. And one day I'll get enough information in my head to find out how much is, right up there and true. But that's what I've been reading a lot through the scientific papers, correlating through or shamanistic books, because my kind of area of research isn't narrow. I tend to try and absorb from everywhere to see pattern, and a lot of you within the room do the same thing. And it's fascinating when we can all get together as a community and interlock and try and see whether things match up yet. We might have to put them on the back burner and come back to them for another couple of years and then suddenly go, oh, actually, no, that does match up. But we never throw any data away. And that's the fantastic thing about this. And I think you'd say the same, wouldn't you, Peake?
Yeah, I would, absolutely. I was just saying thank you for sending me that Mandelbrot set. And yeah, thank you very much. And also, my brother's going to go in a minute. So thank you for listening, Phil. And happy birthday to Oscar again. But yeah, I would agree. So just doing a kind of roundup of stuff.
Well, thank you very much, I have to say, for actually staying here on someone's birthday, for your brother be doing that, because obviously birthdays do take importance, but it's also very nice, as I say to you all the time, for turning up and spending time with us and talking when other people don't always have that opportunity to spare the time. And night Renegade, because I know that you got to go and you've been around, and it's nice to see Chris, etc. I mean, it's just so nice that people want to come and talk and be part of the community, whether it's every week or just in different times when they got the opportunity to come. And obviously the Americans who are going into Thanksgiving, it's even more of them giving up their time to actually do that, which is quite amazing. So thank you very much for turning up. And also the Dutch. Esteval has decided not to be vocal at the moment.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So
sorry,
again,
yeah.
If anybody wants to ask a question or throw something on the table, just raise your hand and we're quite happy to go around that. We're kind of opening up the section on the topic at the moment on obviously reincarnation and other bits, but there is so much coming up recently with the people that we're talking to. I mean, Fractal, it's nice to see you turn up. I think we've seen you about a couple of times. I've seen your icon come round, and you've actually brought great information for us to see, and I'm looking forward to looking at the video called The Egg. So it's good. And thank you, Philip, for obviously turning up for the very first time. And
yeah, thank you. And thank you, Phil. And also thank you, Fuji, as well. And I absolutely agree with what you say, with what you're saying, Fuji. Now, I just remember that there's something I didn't get around to saying, which wasn't in my notes earlier, but it's quite interesting. The origin of the book, The Children That Time Forgot, that when it was published first, as I mentioned, it was called Life Before Birth. And so my brother, not Phil, but another brother of mine, younger brother, younger than Phil even, he was born. And when he was a very young baby, my mum, who was always quite curious and alert to everything, she noticed that there was something about the way that he was looking at the pillowcase that interested her. The pillowcase was a floral pillowcase. It had flowers on it, like pictures of flowers, a flower print. And there was something about the way that he was looking at it where my mum thought he recognized flowers. So she wrote she wrote a letter, sent it in the post to Woman's Own, which you may remember, Woman's Own, people that live in Britain. It was I don't know, it's probably still available, but it was like a quite very popular, I mean, it's ridiculous, idea, but a very popular magazine for women. I never read it myself, but I can imagine it was quite, crap, basically. But she wrote into the letters page of Woman's Own, and she said, she kind of recounted this story of my brother looking inquisitively at the flower pattern of the pillowcase, and she said, has anyone else had any unusual experiences with their children? I don't think she used the word experiences, but like unusual stories, but she definitely used the word unusual. And I know that because she mentions that in the video of her being interviewed, which I posted on Twitter a couple of days ago. She says, I don't know if that's a wise word to use, but we got bucket loads in response. And so the response, that was supposed to be Scottish, the response was that loads of people wrote to her and said, well, you'll never believe it. My child says that she, is reincarnated. She says that, talks about when I was here before type thing. And that's how she basically got lots and lots of letters in response to her letter in Woman's Own. And the letters said, this is, my child is talking about reincarnation. And that is the origin of the Children of Time Forgot. Before that, even though my mum, there was kind of something going on with her in terms of the paranormal, nothing big, like out-of-body experiences and something to do with electricity, like she couldn't wear a watch. And I know that for the guys that are listening all day, like you're thinking, why are you telling us that again? Bloody the watch story with your mum again. We heard that 3 hours ago, but I'm just talking about it for the people who've just joined us. She wasn't necessarily interested in, she wasn't interested in reincarnation at all. She wasn't looking to do a book about reincarnation. It's just that she had picked up my brother's alertness to the pattern of flowers, and she wrote into the magazine, and it was kind of like, fueled by the response. So, yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? It's a nice origin story. It's like a Marvel movie that hasn't been made with Helen Mirren playing my mum. And Timothy Chalamet could play could play me, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's always fascinating when people have obviously a deep interest in something they shouldn't have when they're children, when it relates to something that's older to a previous person of a greater age. I had to summarize that in my head quite a lot. For example, you've got Melissa had the case with her grandfather's watch, that she had never seen her grandfather, but she ended up picking up out of her mother's jewelry box the actual watch, but didn't know it was belonging to the grandfather. And when she was holding it in a fashion, she had such a deep emotional connection of feeling of crying, along with obviously the outpouring of grief as well. And when she asked her mother about the watch, it was from the grandfather, but it was from, the emotion was coming from the grandmother. After the grandfather had died, she was holding onto it for a long time, and she was obviously very upset about it. So she has the kind of gift of psychometry, of picking up intense feelings and imagery from different items. So that's always kind of a fascinating way of picking up information, as all of this is some kind of information.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I wonder, my brother, by the way, didn't go on to say, when I lived before I picked flowers or whatever, I was a florist or whatever. But I do wonder about the kind of, what's the word? The integrity of his thoughts, or what was actually going on for him at that point, But yeah, there we go.
Almost like a record needle being stuck in a groove, that suddenly it just possibly pops into another one, gets that information, because we don't know how we connect up to thinking, to the universal, whatever knowledge is being encoded everywhere in a way. Estevelle?
Yeah, I'm sort of intrigued by this notion of your earliest memory, because I suppose, I really, if someone asks me what's your first memory, your earliest memory, given that we are very much associative thinkers, nothing would really directly pop in my head and say, oh yeah, that's my earliest memory. But then when Paranormal Blip mentioned floral patterns, and maybe that's also something from the time, like late 70s.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. This is early 80s, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I think 70s, it really was from the time. Yeah.
Early, because I can remember, because I was like thinking, oh yeah, I remember when I was 3 and we had this sort of vinyl plastic psychedelic brown, orange, yellow, weird floral pattern, tablecloth thing, which is, of course, is ideal for little kids to throw with food and all that. So I can, I immediately remember that, because and I remember, being stuck in my little chair with the sort of the fixed what do you call that? The sort of plank, this sort of board in which you.
Yeah, the baby chair.
Yeah, the baby chair.
The high chair.
You mean your tray?
Yeah. The tray, and and then that sort of is like a little higher than the table, the dining table, and then that plastic or vinyl or whatever it is, this sort of specific tablecloth with this sort of late 70s psychedelic weird thing, which I don't know how old that thing was, but if you watch old TV things, there's like wallpaper with all these elaborate flowers and stuff on it, and it's just it's maybe also the that particular time when. I'm not sure if it has anything to do with actual flowers, but you do have, a baby who's just lying around in his crib, is just staring at the ceiling or at these toys, which are sort of floating or on a, these things on little wires, which are just hang. So you have these things imprinted as a little kid, which you just stare at, because, what else are you going to stare at? And when you're a toddler, I suppose the same thing goes. In your world is very much confined to the floor, and if the floor has a particular sort of tiles or other sort of floor pattern, so you have imprinted all these sort of visual stimuli, I suppose. So yeah.
The interesting thing about the baby's perception is that you only have focal point up to 30 centimeters when you're very small. So as a small child, as a baby, before you start developing, you've only got that ability to focus within 30 centimeters. Anything past that is blurred out.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. This has got, I suppose, I don't know. It's just, just an open question to everyone in here. What was your earliest memory? Can you readily tell, oh yeah, this was my earliest memory? Because I find that very difficult.
I've got a few. I know that I was in a pram at one stage, and I have the sensations and the smells and texture feel of that. What else? There's also being in a bathtub as well. I remember that being very young. So there's strange things along those lines. Anybody else?
Come on, all at once.
And the room goes quiet. Nobody else is out there.
I can say my earliest memory. Who's this is connected, by the way. Who's the guy that directed The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and I Love Her? Who's that guy? I forgot. It's gone out of my mind. Do you know who I'm talking about? No. Well, whilst you Google it.
I know the film, yeah. I know the film, because he directed Zoo as well. Not Zoo.
Yeah, hold on a second, hold on. But anyway, so my earliest memory is of this very distinct, here we are, very distinctive kind of circular windows by in London, Peter Greenaway. in
Right.
London,
Yeah.
somewhere in London, yeah. And
Yeah.
we were.
Hang on one second. Booty Bandit?
Yes.
I just have to say, have you read the rules, the guidelines for the room?
guidelines?
Yeah.
Yes.
If you want to say something, just put your hand up, and then
my
we'll
hand
get
up.
to you when the other person's finishing.
Let the
Yeah.
person finish.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Can you
Okay, no problem.
okay. All right, I got it.
Okay, cool. So somewhere in North London,
So
we were. Booty? Oh, sorry, that wasn't Booty. It's a good name, Booty. But somewhere in North London, the windows of the flat that my grandmother lived in, there were circular windows, and that's my earliest memory. It was this visit to my grandmother, my mother's mother, who died. I can't remember when she died, but she died. This is my earliest memory, right? And this is my only memory of her. So she must have died when I was very young. And I remember the windows, and I remember her. And in my memory, she sat there in the middle of the room, and it's beautifully symmetrical, like Peter Greenaway's work. Yeah. And I can't remember much about her. I can remember what she looks like. She was an old lady with curly hair.
To help our research and understanding, leave Perceptions Today's podcast reviews, subscribe to the podcast, along with the other social media accounts, and share. Come and join our live events. That way we can get together and have thoughtful discussions along with advancing our understanding of concepts as we go along.